Hello and welcome to the Recovery Matters podcast from CCAR, the podcast where putting recovery first is always the goal. Here we present interviews, discussions, stories, and speeches to cultivate the understanding and acceptance of the power, hope, and healing of recovery from alcohol and other addictions. Here are your hosts, Phil and Sandy Valentine.
Phil, I have a set of unfortunate circumstances quite often happen in my life.
What do you mean by unfortunate circumstances?
I fall down.
Oh, yeah.
I hurt myself.
That was unfortunate.
Doing ridiculous
So when she fell
things.
down, she's talking about when she fell down, she shattered her shoulder in three places.
That was just that time, but...
Oh, that time. Other times.
Other times, yeah. So I have a long-standing back problem, though, that has been not bothering me too much. And this morning, I turned 2 degrees this way, like literally just turned this way, and it spasmed, and it's in spasm today. And I find that to be unfortunate because we have a chance to talk with today on the podcast, somebody who's all about physical fitness.
Yeah, well, I don't know that he's throwing around bags of dog food because that's what you blamed it on, right? Was the dog food?
Yeah, it was the big bag of dog food, and I had to refill the things, and I had to go to the grocery store and get it, and then I had to take the cooler out of the car that nobody took out of the car, so I did all the wrong things yesterday.
So what was the lesson you told me, though, about the dog food?
I don't like to ask for help.
How about that?
Yeah, it's kind of my problem.
I know some folks like that.
I knew better. I'm like, do not refill the thing with the dog food, but I didn't see anybody initiating any movement, and so I jumped in, and now I couldn't wear cute shoes today, and we're talking with a fitness guy.
That's right.
Yeah. So who are we talking with?
We're talking with Scott Strode. Hello, Scott.
Hi there. Happy to be here.
Yeah. You drove down from Boston to Hartford? Were you in Boston?
Yeah, it was a nice drive.
And what time do you have to get up, or do you get up early anyway?
I was up early. Actually, my son was up early, and I was up with him.
How old's your son?
5 months.
Ooh.
So
Congratulations.
My first.
Yeah,
thanks.
What's it like being a dad?
It's great. It's really great. It's a lot harder than you think going into it. Everybody tells you it's harder than you think, and then you get into it and you realize this is harder than I thought. So, but it's been great. It's been a busy year in the pandemic. My wife and I got married and had our first son. So
yeah. So the pandemic's been good to you?
Yeah, we stayed busy even though we watched every single show on Netflix. So we survived, I think, through the tough stuff. But
it doesn't sound like you're original to Boston, though.
No, I'm not. I did get sober in Boston, but I'm from Pennsylvania.
Okay, what part?
Lancaster County.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Were you Amish by any chance?
No, our neighbors were Amish, and I misspent most of my youth, spinning donuts in my mom's station wagon in an Amish field. But yeah, so from Pennsylvania.
It's a beautiful area.
So our paths have crossed a few times over all the years we've both been involved with the recovery movement. What is your title now, and where do you work?
The executive director and founder of the Phoenix.
Right. And so the Phoenix is?
The Phoenix is a free, sober, active community. We use the inherent transformative power of connection and activities to help people who are healing from substance use disorder.
Right. And I think our organizational values, I've met with a lot of recovery community organizations across the years, talked to people, and our values really align beautifully. And so I'm just so pleased you could be here and that we could talk a little bit and get to know each other some more.
Yeah, I'm glad as well. It's good to be here.
And I had a chance, I watched your TED Talk yesterday to kind of get a sense. And one of the things that I didn't learn, and I know TED Talk's pretty briefly, but just a little bit about who you are, what was it like growing up in Lancaster County, and kind of how the road got you to here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, what was little Scott like? Were you ever little?
I told my friend that my wife and I were expecting, and I said, we're going to have a little one. And he said, I don't think there'll ever be a little Strode.
Right.
So But no, I was always a pretty big guy. So was my dad, and but grew up in Pennsylvania. My dad lived in sort of a really rural part on a farm, and then my mom lived in Lancaster. And for me, growing up, I was kind of back and forth between those two homes, and that was sort of where some of the foundation of my actual addiction story started. Grew up with alcoholism in the home, and my father had untreated mental illness, so it was a pretty dynamic environment when I was with him.
Dynamic.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Were they married and got divorced?
They got divorced when I was pretty young. So when we were with him on his farm, it was mostly my brother and my sister and I just kind of having adventures out there on our own, which was fun for a period of time until you get a little older and you realize that we probably should have had a little more supervision than we did.
What were some of the adventures on a farm in Pennsylvania?
Yeah,
something that you remember.
We crawling around in the little culverts under the where the stream goes under the roads was a favorite, and then trying to swim across the pond, which unsupervised, which was probably pretty dangerous. But and then grew up with my dad hunting. He loved more just being outdoors, so he taught me a lot about being outdoors and nature, and I didn't know it at the time, but I think that did plant some seeds for my love of adventure outside, which played a big part in my recovery. So.
So in our family, I'm kind of the risk manager. I worked in an insurance company for over 30 years, and he's the risk instigator. So everything you just described doing, Phil would have let our kids do unsupervised too.
I did. But I remember crawling under the culverts in Manchester, but it wasn't just under a road. It went like quarter mile, things like that. I mean, if you think about it today, you go like, what? But she always talks about when I was a stay-at-home dad for, 2 years, 2.5?
Almost 3, yeah.
Almost 3 years, that I would set up these, amusement parks in the backyard, which consisted of, a little tight slide on a picnic table into a swimming pool with a hose running down the slide.
With 6 inches of water.
And my 3 and 1-year-olds are, sliding off the slide. Whee! And she would get all...
And I didn't know any of this happened until I watched, the videos that he recorded it all.
Right.
15 years later.
Oh, that's awesome. I would have been right there for sure.
Yeah. And in your mom's house. So I'm guessing a little different.
Yeah, a little different, although she had to work pretty hard. She was essentially the primary caregiver.
Yeah.
And a working mom in a time where there was still some stigma around divorce, sort of the woman's fault, in those days. And
what year were you born?
I was born in 73.
73.
Yeah, and they divorced when I was about 3 years old.
You're still a youngster.
Yeah, I'm just a kid.
Yeah.
So, but she was great. She did her best to have some adventures with us and spend as much time with us as she could. And she and I ended up growing to be very close over the years. And she ultimately, in the past couple of years, passed from Alzheimer's. But I got to return the favor of being the caregiver to her later in life, which was a real gift.
My mom died at 90 though, but from Alzheimer's as well.
Yeah, it's a tough road, and I think it was a little bit compassionate, sort of, that it was a shorter path for her.
Yeah.
So it was a little tough at the end.
Was your dad's farm a working farm?
Not so much. He had goats on it, and that was about it. It was just a beautiful Pennsylvania farm.
Did he work, or is that how he sustained himself? I mean, is that how he fed himself?
No, he worked. He had other he did some house construction, and then sold cars, and he did whatever he could to kind of keep it together. But it was, we actually lived in pretty significant poverty when we were with him, and a little bit different dynamic when we were with my mom. And so we had very different worlds that we grew up in the same lifetime. So it was much of that kind of contributed to my story. I had I mentioned this a little bit in my TED Talk, but my dad, I think, had carried his own pain from the loss of his father. He left when he was really young, so there was some abandonment there. But my dad was the type of father at the time that would, if you sort of lost the soccer game, he'd yell at you, and if you won, he'd yell at you because you should have done better. And so it was, it's hard to win there. And I think some of those self-esteem wounds really led me to my drinking and drug use. It was just a great way to numb that out. And then as I became the life of the party, I started to feel this sense of, value, and people liked hanging around with me. And then as quick as that coping mechanism worked for me, it stopped working for me. So it was turned into a more destructive element in my adolescence and into my early 20s.
How would you describe yourself as an adolescent? What did you like to do? What were you about?
Yeah, I think I was pretty rebellious, In those days, my mohawk went this way instead of now it goes more this way. Yeah. So
you did?
Yeah.
You have a picture of that?
I don't. It's an old one. Yeah, I can send it over.
Wow.
But I had a mohawk. I had a leather jacket that said "Don't tread on me," which actually got me trod on more than it didn't at that age. And
you were mean?
I wasn't mean. I was just more, kind of. There's something about the rebellious nature of like that early punk rock that kind of spoke to me, and so I jumped in with both feet, and my combat boots and 7 earrings and
becoming a theme a little
stuff.
bit. Some of these folks that we've interviewed have similar.
Right.
Yeah.
Were you an athlete at all then?
I wasn't actually. I grew super fast, so I had this thing called, I think it's Ojhagen Slaughters in my knees, where my knees were couldn't keep up with the growth, and there was some instability.
Yeah.
And it takes a little while if you have big growth spurts, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so by the time I was able to be an athlete, I had already found the cut and school lifestyle than less the athletic lifestyle. But I think there were some early kind of connections to just athletics in general. My brother and sister were athletes. My father was an athlete. And so I guess I saw that within me, even though I didn't sort of realize that potential.
So your dad was an athlete.
Yeah.
What did he do?
He played soccer. He played farm league, baseball. He was...
That was the era when soccer wasn't all that big.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a legit athlete. He was like kind of semi-pro baseball, and I think it was All-American soccer player at the time. And,
amazing.
Yeah.
And what did your brother and sister do? What did they like?
Brother was more like baseball, soccer. Sister was basketball. She was really good.
She have your height?
She had my height. She's about 6 foot. So she got some scholarships for basketball and some for academics. And of course, my brother and I said, go for the basketball. She rightly chose the academics side.
Where are you in the birth order?
I'm the baby.
You're the baby.
So
Got it.
Yeah. So.
Well, we're in the punk rock phase or the mohawk phase. I'm still trying to wrap my head around seeing you with a mohawk, but that's fascinating. Where'd you go from there? Yeah,
so there I was already starting to get into some trouble, right? Like I now in reflecting back, I feel like I was hanging out with the wrong crowd, but at some point I became the wrong crowd. So I don't know where that bridge happened. Yeah. But just honestly, I was felt pretty, oppressed by my stepfather. He was very controlling, and I think when you're in your adolescence, trying to find yourself and feel sort of squelched, it sometimes comes out sideways, and I think that's where the mohawk came from, and I heard about a program on a boat. It was for kids with dyslexia. I have a learning disability also. And And I think my mom saw it as an opportunity to get me out of the environment that I was in at the time, and sent me off on this at sea program, a semester at sea program. And it was exactly what I needed. It was like that instant sort of cause and effect of nature. The captain would say, "Don't do this." I would do it. The wave would crush me on the deck of the ship, and I realized oh, maybe he knows something that I don't. And started to learn some life lessons.
What kind of ship?
These were traditional rigged sort of tall ships, schooners.
Ship,
and
you did that?
Yeah. So I sailed around for a while.
Out of where?
Out of the ship. The school was in Pride's Crossing, Massachusetts, called Landmark, but the program was called Watermark, and for kids with dyslexia. And so you would learn, math, and then you would use that to navigate the ship, through the English Channel or whatever it was. So it was a cool program. It doesn't exist anymore, but I found this love for the sea there that when I came ashore from that program. I don't know if this was the goal of it for my mom, but I dropped out of high school and started working on boats. And working on ships actually brought me to New England. I moved to Boston to work on ships, and then ultimately worked in Fairhaven, Massachusetts in a shipyard.
Did you, when you were on the tall ship, what was the wildest storm you ever rode out? Were there any?
Yeah, there were some. I'd say the wildest was... we left Bermuda crossing the Atlantic.
In the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, in the Bermuda Triangle. And a tropical storm had come up the coast, or a hurricane came up the coast, turned into a tropical storm, and then the Gulf Stream pulled it off the coast and it crossed the Atlantic, which is the normal track. And it followed us over. So we were in just huge seas crossing the Atlantic. And it was the first time on the ship where the waves...
No, not for me.
Yeah.
The weather was so bad that there were only two people on deck. One person was tied in to watch the person who was steering the ship, who was also tied in. So you had a person watching you so that if you went overboard, at least somebody could tell somebody. But it was... we made it through unscathed... with a little
probably
bit.
Pretty quickly too, right?
yeah.
The storm blew
Were you
me across.
terrified, or?
I probably should have been. I don't think your prefrontal cortex was fully developed, so that got me through. But it was something about the power of nature and the sea that started to seep into me and into my bones, and ultimately...
I have a bucket list.
Yeah.
And on my bucket list is I want to ride out a hurricane on the open ocean. And she has no desire to do that with me. Absolutely not.
Have at it, Have at it. If that's something you want to do.
I just think that I've never been out on the water in that kind of situation. And I would just be in awe of what was happening around me. I would love it.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And I know it's dangerous and all that, but there are worse ways to go, I think.
just pick the right boat. That's all I say.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Don't pick a leaky one.
Pick the right boat.
Yeah.
So when you're working in a shipyard instead of on a boat, what was that transition like? Did you like that?
I liked being at sea more than on land. I think I had some adjusting to do to kind of get back to land life. You're just pretty self-sufficient as a community on a ship.
How long were you on boats, roughly? Years?
Roughly almost 3 years. 2 years pretty solidly, and then sort of shorter contracts working on ships after that.
And what kind of roles did you have on the ship? What were you doing?
I was mostly a deckhand, the basic.
What kind of ships?
On schooners, and I would just... Basically, you paint is what you do. You paint and do maintenance, and then you run the sails and everything when they move the ship. And then I sort of graduated to a bosun who takes care of all the rigging, everything above the deck. And so you'd go up aloft in the rigging and take care of that stuff. And I will say that working on ships in the shipyards was a pretty good place to refine your alcoholism to an art.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't know until I was probably 20 that you could put a lid back on a bottle of rum. I thought you just threw them away. That's just how they worked.
Yep.
And that was the crew that I hung out with a lot in those days.
Well, I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
But the other part was, I knew something when I was that age. I knew the sea was calling me because I grew up on a boat since like the age of 11 or 12. My dad had a boat, and we go out every weekend around Long Island Sound fishing and things. And my buddy Matt and I always talked about being a captain of a charter boat was like a dream job. And he actually does have his charter boat license now, but he was a teacher for 33 years. And I always thought what my life might have been like if I had joined either the Navy or the Coast Guard. Because I was always thinking then I would be on boats that I would just be at home out on the sea. And I think it was fear that held me back from doing something like that. Like your family,
My dad and brother were both Navy.
Okay.
Guys. My dad never made it out on a boat, but my brother did in the Vietnam War for sure.
He was on an aircraft carrier, right? Was he on an aircraft carrier?
SS Joliet out of
Somewhere.
New Orleans.
Wow.
New Orleans. That's a big boat, I'm sure.
Did you ever think of doing something like that?
I didn't until later in life.
Right.
Yeah. I think I did get drawn into the idea of working in the kind of more commercial shipping trade, as and I thought about studying for my captain's license and that stuff. And I actually tried for a period of time to get certified as that through the Merchant Marines, and but my dyslexia was just really hard for the sort of math requirements on some of that stuff. And at that time, I was getting more interested in just maybe having an address where somebody could mail me something, or getting the Christmas card around Christmas, not 3 months later.
Yeah,
which is kind of what happens on ships.
Yeah.
And I remember, my brother and I moved to Boston and got my first apartment at like 21, and all I had was just a sea bag with a couple pairs of clothes, and that were my only possessions. Even though I left home at 18, I didn't have my first place till I was 21.
Traveled light.
Wow.
Yeah. Traveled light.
So you're in Boston, and where do you go from there?
My brother and I moved there together. He was older, but we were always pretty close. My brother and sister and I were always pretty close. I think that we forged some bonds from, all the stuff we experienced as kids. And moved to Boston, and it's like coming from ships to Boston, it's like the perfect city to sort of next level your alcoholism. So I didn't know that anybody in Boston was sober. I thought it was impossible. And fortunately lived, like 3 doors down from the bar we drank at. So it was a pretty short walk both directions. And so we were kind of off and running, but still working in shipyards at the time. In Charlestown Navy Yard, I was working at a boat shop. And we were using the sort of transformative power of kind of being on boats and working with your hands to build boats with at-risk youth. So I was already starting to get into some of the sort of service work, but was still active in my own addiction story.
Yeah. Wow.
So tell us, how are we getting close to the time where you had your awakening?
Yeah, we were actually. I started to feel very, very much sort of like a hypocrite when I was sort of working with these kids, telling them how they should be living their life. And then at night, I was in the darkness of my own addiction story. And often, in what they shared with me, it sounded like their mother or father was very much in the same place I was, And I started to have a harder time kind of looking these kids in the eye when I would go to work the next day. And sort of decided to take my sort of trade more into like fine carpentry and woodworking as opposed to, working on ships. And went to a school called North Bennett Street School for cabinet and furniture making. And that's, while I was at school there, is when I ultimately got sober. I say there's probably about a year and a half I was trying to quit drinking and using. I wouldn't say I relapsed. I didn't get enough time to call it recovery in that year and a half. But I kept trying to kind of like just quit. And I didn't really know how to do it. I didn't get connected to the 12-step community at the time, but I remember back to my childhood, my stepfather saying we were going to go on this camping trip, and it really spoke to me, this idea of being outdoors. It ultimately got rained out, but we had bought all this equipment, and this sort of preparing for it really, made me excited.
Yeah.
So I thought, I'm going to get outdoorsy, and I didn't know what that meant, but I went to a outdoor equipment store, bought a Gore-Tex jacket, and was walking out thinking I'm going to have all these big adventures, and saw a brochure for ice climbing. And I thought, that's about the craziest thing I've ever seen. I want to go do that. And a couple weeks later, I was in the White Mountains of New Hampshire for my first ice climbing lesson, which I didn't know it at the time would ultimately be what anchored me into who I am as somebody in recovery now.
Ice is one of those things that has caused me to fall in my lifetime, and I certainly wasn't climbing up any kind of ice-covered wall. So
yeah, it just was so foreign. It was such a unique experience to watch this guide climb up this ice climb effortlessly, and then it was my turn, and I just was like suffering up this thing, sweating and struggling and breathing heavy. And it just sort of felt like how my life was at the time in my addiction. Everything was a struggle. Everything seemed harder. And it began to like paint this picture of who I could be. Mm-hmm. And I thought, will I ever be able to climb like he did? And I started to aspire to that. And slowly over time, I started to realize if I stayed sober 2 nights on the weekend instead of just 1, I could climb 2 days instead of just 1. And then I'd end up drinking during the week. And then I was like, well, if I can stay sober Thursday night and my buddy can take off work, we could actually climb 3 days over the weekend. So I started piecing together some clean time. And ultimately, after about 1.5 years of some pretty bad nights, just one of those clean times stuck. And here I am.
How old were you?
I was, if we could do math, it was a little over 24 years ago. So
it was amazing.
Yeah, a little over 24 years ago.
You were going to work with kids, and you were actually building boats with the kids?
Yeah.
And what kind of boats were you building?
Just small, kind of like dories, like fishing dories.
Yeah.
And then we go out and row them around Boston Harbor and sail them around. And the schooner that I worked on up until that time was docked in the same place. So sometimes we take the kids out on the boat. But in those days, there were kids that grew up in sort of Charlestown and Southie and those parts of Boston when they were Charlestown and Southie, back in the day.
That was a tough area.
Yeah,
a really tough area.
Yeah,
what a cool program.
It was a great
program. And how was it
program.
funded? Do you even remember?
Just grants and nonprofit fund, same stuff we do today.
Yeah.
So
amazing.
I have a different sympathy for the guys who ran it.
Right. And where was where in the White Mountains was the ice climb?
In North Conway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Up what mountain, or do you remember?
We were climbing a cathedral ledge
at
that time, but ultimately that sort of whole area became kind of a playground for my early recovery. We climbed a lot in Crawford Notch and on Frankenstein Cliff, and climbing Mount Washington in the winter, and even in the summer, as you know.
You're not right.
Those mountains are
you're
legit.
Just not right.
I always knew that. So.
Oh my gosh.
What was it like living with your brother after you got sober?
He ultimately got sober as well.
Yeah.
It was he got sober before me, and I convinced him he wasn't an alcoholic and told him he should come back out drinking. So he did. And then I got sober. Then ultimately he came along on that journey. So. I think the fact that we did it together is a big part of why it stuck early on for me.
So what do you say to people that, I don't know if you've ever been asked this or told this, that you're not really in sobriety because you didn't get sober in 12 steps?
Yeah. I would say that there's a lot of ways we can get here. And I think that I always think it's like when you go out to dinner together, you're going to look at the menu and you're going to look at the menu and I'm going to look at it. What we order and what sort of satiates us is going to be different for each one of us.
Right.
And that's okay. We can still all sit and eat together and have a great night, you know? And I think recovery is sort of the same way. It takes everybody has the right combination of things that can help them get on this journey. And for me, in the early days, it wasn't 12-step. You know, 6 years in recovery, I worked the steps, but it was because I started to have some friends that were in the program, and that was a part of my life, maybe from 6 years sober to like 8 years sober, and now it's not as much. But I think it's okay, however it fits into your world, then that's fine.
I've also heard people say, well, then you must not have been really alcoholic.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And my response to that is, does it matter?
Yeah.
Whether you are or not, does it really matter?
Yeah. I think
it doesn't matter at all.
However it feels for you, if it feels like it's impacting you and the people you love negatively, and you need to change your relationship with it, then that's your journey and your story.
Well, for you to be able to find that just by, say, looking at the kids, you couldn't even look them in the eye anymore because you felt hypocritical. I mean, I think we have a 19-year-old son that we're watching go through this process right now of discovering what works for him and definitely discovering what does not work for him, but doesn't mean he won't return to it, because one of his questions was this past summer to me was, Dad, how do you define fun? And he had just come back from his worst night in a long time. And I said, why do you ask? He says, because my friends think fun is going out and drinking and smoking weed, and they think that's fun. And I said, do you? He goes, I used to think that. And so what's fun for you now? And so, Scott, what's fun for you now?
I think it's changed a lot over the years, but I think in my early recovery, I started to realize that like the sort of thrill or kick you would get from the facing the greater adversity with a group of people and that bond you build, that was the fun for me. You know, having a climbing partner and going out on a tough, cold day and trying to climb this route that you hadn't climbed before or something. Even if you were defeated and ultimately came home, it was the path was the goal, not the summit, you know, and that's where I sort of found my fun. But I think in those days I still was trying to sort of prove something to myself about my self-worth as a person, and that I was sort of worthy of being loved, and that I was just of value. And so I think I always had to have like sort of a harder trip on the calendar or harder race, or started doing triathlon and started mountain biking, and then I had to do Ironman, and then I had to do a 24-hour race. And, you know, it just was always, I was still chasing something. And it was even starting the Phoenix was part of my, I think I was trying to rescue people, really trying to rescue myself, and ultimately realized one day that I had this intrinsic value, as all of us do, and we're all deserving of love just by the fact of being here on Earth, right? And as I really started to believe that, I was able to approach my work very differently. And so what fun was for me at that point was more about sharing the journey with other people and seeing the smile that they got when they got to the top of the climb, not so much having it have to be me at the top of the climb.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you still climbing?
Not so much. No, it's just something that takes some dedication and focus, and I spend a lot of time on planes and at laptops and that kind of thing nowadays.
We were on vacation and we watched Free Solo for the first time. Did you see that?
I did see that.
That was like one of the most amazing things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's the documentary about the young men free climbing up El Capitan, right?
Yeah, well, it's Alex Honnold that he does it without ropes. So we watched the other one too that were dangling from the ropes. But this is where he does it without ropes.
Right.
And it was like 3,200 feet. He did it in 4 hours.
Yeah.
But there was one shot there, and, people are saying, oh, my God, he's crazy, he's going to die, one slip, he's going to die. Well, he was well aware of that. There's no doubt. But there was a part where he had to kick his leg out and get that toe hold and then pull himself over, where he had slipped several times with ropes.
Yeah.
And then when he made that, he looked into the camera, because Jimmy Chin had the camera down there, and the look on his face, and I'm getting spirit rushes thinking about it, was he was lit up. And I've seen that in people so many times, like, he was just so alive. It was a different dimension, and he just kind of smiled and cruised right up the rock, he was doing what he was made to do and loved to do. And who are you to judge that when people find that, whatever that may be? Because that's him being alive.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's an incredible film. And it's I mean, I definitely saw some similarities in what he was seking and some of the stuff that I was seeking.
Yeah, right.
Maybe not quite at that scale, but
I know. I didn't want to do anything that I couldn't do something like that. I don't like heights anyway. I don't want to be on that rock and that exposed. But I do know when I hiked the trail in 2015, that is when I step on the trail still to this day, and I feel like it's almost an electric current runs along that pathway. And we were on vacation, and I was able to hike 10 miles. And I wasn't really physically in the best shape to do that, but I did it. And I was just so, when I'm walking, and I only saw 2 trail maintainers right at the beginning, and 1 ridge runner who is a person that actually works on the trail. I didn't see another soul for 10 miles.
Wow.
On the Appalachian Trail.
Wow.
And I was surrounded by green and lush, and you know this feeling. That's when I feel so alive and so connected. I need to be outside. So much so now that I sleep outside, right, Sandy?
Yeah, he sleeps in our camper.
There we go.
He started with a bed, an extra bed we had under a gazebo on the deck. That's how it started. And after 3 gazebos meshed and
in wind
fell
or
apart,
snow or whatever.
because he was doing it year round.
Yeah.
Then we moved to a tent cot. Have you ever seen a tent cot?
Yeah.
So we moved to a tent cot, but he didn't like the airflow in the tent cot.
No, it's
so
a little claustrophobic.
I talked him into a camper, and he insisted on one with pop-outs so that it was more of a tent experience.
So you
now
could
he
sleep
sleeps
outside.
He sleeps in the camper, so
Hey,
Right.
yeah, it works.
we're not too different. When I was climbing, I used to love, when I get a new sleeping bag, just throw it down on the deck and put it to the test. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if a blizzard comes in, then you just gotta see if it keeps you warm overnight.
The dream is a sleeping porch in whatever future home we might have, so that we don't have to have extra things.
One night I slept, it was in single degrees, and she thought for sure I was dead on the porch.
Yeah.
So what'd
So
you do
I
first?
thought I was going to be calling the ambulance. I mean, I really am playing this out. I looked at my phone at 8 degrees. He lasted all night, and so I just was like, well, I better go to the bathroom first, because if I call the ambulance, it's going to take some time. That was my thought process. So I come out of the bedroom after all that's accomplished, and he's walking in the door, and I'm like, he's alive. He made it.
You can always walk indoors if you're freezing.
So he was like a phoenix rising out of the cold.
That's good.
So how did...
Well, before you ask him that question, I want to talk to you a little bit about what lights you up.
Well, I'm more of a beach girl. So we had a chance to spend a week, my bucket list, to rent a place actually on the beach. So we were literally, there was hardly any space between the condo and the ocean. And got to see the ocean almost 24/7, which there's something for me that I see the vastness of the ocean, the dune grass. For some reason, sand is not dirt to me at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel it just settle out, right sizes me to look at that open ocean. So we have a bit of a issue in our future life someday, figuring out how he can be in the mountains and I can be at the beach.
Well, I don't mind the beach. And only this year I realized what it was about the beach that I didn't like. And I feel trapped on a beach because I can only walk left or right, and sometimes you can't even walk that far depending on the shore, right? And I have no real way, unless I had a boat, to go explore the ocean.
Yeah.
And usually what's behind you, you don't want to walk that way or travel or explore. So I'm kind of like really limited on the beach. I love to go down the next trail or see where the next pathway leads or take that long, long walk, through the woods. And so I think it's endless when you're in the woods. You have so many things you can see and do. So I just realized that lately. Am I a little off there too?
Not at all. I think you guys. I think the Pacific Northwest is probably where you both need to be then, because we got mountains.
There's no sun,
and we got ocean.
She needs the sun though too.
Oh yeah.
Minor detail.
A minor detail.
Right.
At least you can find a beach next to a mountain there. So.
Yeah. Well, sometimes in Maine there's a couple places. Camden, they have that mountain that comes down, and it's a little rocky. But I don't know where we're going to end up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if any of us do, but
right.
As long as you're having a good life on the way there, then. So
Sandy was about to ask you more about the Phoenix and how that started and where you started it and how would you describe that journey?
Yeah, it's actually the sort of foundation of it started in Boston, where I was still living and in recovery. At that point, I was went from my early recovery, finding my way to a boxing gym. Climbing and boxing were a big part of that early sobriety. But I realized that boxing's not that good for your head, and I was a heavyweight, so that was a problem. So I just started doing triathlon. I thought this could be cool. I'll try this, and I didn't really know how to swim. My first swim coach said I looked like fried chicken because I sat in one spot and just kind of bubbled.
No, he did.
Yeah, I could barely get to the end of the pool. Wow. But I did a race in Boston to raise money and awareness for the AIDS Action Committee.
Yeah.
It was called the Monster Challenge. It was a long time ago. It doesn't exist anymore, I don't think. But a training group from that race started an email list, and we were all sort of training together. And I said, does anybody want to keep training for triathlon together? And I started to organize this sort of multi-sport club. And it wasn't specifically for people in recovery, but it was called Team Mercury, and a bunch of friends came together, and we got really close as friends. We would go climb, we'd race races, we'd go ride bikes, we'd just have adventures. But it was really the early days of what Phoenix would become. Mm-hmm. And when I moved to Colorado, one of my friends was Jackie Helios, was a clinical social worker, and she was working on her doctorate at Boston College in social work. And my other friend was my climbing partner, Ben Court. He lived in Colorado. And we just started talking about, we got to get other sober folks out here with us on these adventures. And so I just kind of pulled together a group in my living room in Colorado and said, I want to take sort of what I learned from this multi-sport group and bring it together with all of your backgrounds, the 11 folks that were there, and start this thing and call it Phoenix Multisport. At the time was the name. And it'll be a free thing for people in recovery, and you got to be 48 hours sober, and we got to support each other, so anything that isn't supportive isn't welcome. And it's going to be huge. We'll make it national. and the idea at the time was because, as you both know, and many of the folks listening, that when you were leaving sort of more formal programs, there wasn't much for support once you left.
Yeah.
If you didn't find the right 12-step community for you when you stepped out the door, there was really not much support for recovery at the time. And I just wanted to see how we could kind of scoop those folks up with love and take them on adventures. And that was the beginning of the Phoenix. And so the folks I brought together at my house were like, that sounds great. You should go do that. And and no one really jumped on board right at the jump. But Phoenix really grew from that moment. So the idea is that it's free recovery support sort of activities. Most of them are athletic based, exercise, boxing, climbing, hiking, cycling, that kind of thing. We do CrossFit, we do yoga, but we've layered in a lot more meditation and mindfulness and social events. So we now have art night and music programming, and it's all free. You just show up. Most of the people leading the events are volunteers, either in recovery who've been touched by a loved one who's struggled, and they're allies and they want to give back and support. And we've went from Boulder, Colorado with 60 Phoenix members to I think we've served over 60,000 people in the last 15 years with free recovery support, and we're now in about 56 communities across the country and just getting started.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So how did you end up in Colorado and starting it there?
Yeah, I was living in Boston. And once I got into triathlon, I was like, I got to move to Boulder. That's like the triathlon training mecca. You go there and it's just mountains to ride up for days and really great athletes to train with. And so I moved out to Colorado. That's where I met my climbing partner, Ben Court, and we started climbing together out there. And it's a really special place. So that's where Phoenix started.
Yeah.
It made a lot of sense in Boulder, even though I would say nationally people were a little confused by it. They were like, wait, so you're going to ride bikes with sober people and that's going to help them stay sober? And I was like, yep, basically. And more so the community they build on the ride is what's helping them stay sober, and the new identity they find in the sport and the new coping mechanism they find by goal setting and pushing through and achieving those goals together. And I always say that, earlier I talked about the greater adversity, but if we face greater adversity together and push through, we are bonded in a different way. I'm sure you saw that on the Appalachian Trail when
Just got back from a couple of visits with Trail Family that he built along the way.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And you're probably closer to them than a lot of people just because you push through some tough stuff together.
Our bond's inseparable. I mean, it's just we just have a deeper understanding. So yeah, I'm fully on board with and understand completely what you're talking about. And recovery is a lot that way too, because we all share that common bond of facing an addiction and overcoming it. And so we have that natural bond. I think it was Bill Wilson in Alcoholics Anonymous talked about like survivors of a shipwreck. That we all share that in common. But when then you actually set like healthy challenges, let's see if we can do that. And I agree with you. Whether you fail or achieve, it's still, some of the most memorable experiences are like when you get caught in a thunderstorm or, or whatever it may be.
So what does it look like from a bricks and mortar kind of thing? Do you have...
We do. We have physical locations. So we have a big space in Denver, a huge space in Boston, more of our flagship. We're hoping to raise the funds to have a West Coast headquarters in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And but we also borrow space. So if you're a CrossFit gym owner or you own a yoga studio, you can open your doors to Phoenix in off hours, and we have volunteers come in and run programs there. Mm-hmm. So when we started growing in the early days, because I hadn't run a nonprofit before, I thought we'll be hiring folks across the country that run Phoenix programs, and to do that, at scale was becoming really difficult. And we kept having people wanting to volunteer to start Phoenix. They're like, I want to start at my community. I'm a cyclist. I'm a climber. I want to give back. I want to be of service. And so we just decided in the last couple of years we just got to get out of the way of folks that want to carry the Phoenix flag and help them carry it. And so we've had about almost 1,000 volunteers sort of in our volunteer pipeline to launch Phoenix in new communities across the country. And like I said, we're just getting started. Our goal is to try to serve 1 million people in the next 4 years with free recovery support.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so powerful, and one of the reasons that I work with students in recovery on a college campus, and having the resource that CCAR offers, I can't tell you, as people reach out to me, families, and I say, well, if you connect with CCAR, their services are free.
Yeah.
Because there's so much that happens when there's an insurance transaction that breaks down the whole magical moment of getting somebody connected with recovery.
Yeah.
No matter who it is, right? It's either my student having to tell their parents because there's going to be an insurance transaction. It's the provider having to interrogate on a whole set of questions that student is not, or that young adult is just not.
Yeah.
They're not going to go through that with you. Forget
Yeah.
it. It's not my time. Having resources like yours that are free, I think, is really how the recovery movement's going to continue to expand and to grow. At the same time that we're seeing a lot of controls wanting to come in.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree totally. I think we saw that magic when we started to work with military and veterans, is that active duty military, could come to Phoenix if they were struggling and not have to identify to the command structure as having a problem with substances,
mm-hmm.
which they often felt would limit their career advancement.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, they just be like, hey, we're going for the CrossFit, but they're staying for the recovery,
mm-hmm.
So it was it's a good way to do it, and I think that what CCAR is doing is great as well. Just like I think that there's big opportunities in the future for Phoenix and CCAR to collaborate on just so many recovery coaches that could connect with our community, who many of which are actually seeking that, and just bridging that would be great.
I've had conversations with Jackie, and not so much with you, but the model is that these volunteers, a way to get them trained to be recovery coaches. So they're doing what they love. They want to bring, recovery activities, and the coach piece is really just about helping people, asking right questions, helping to connect with people, finding out what makes people tick, seeing what you could design to do that. And as I think about the model, there's a couple Phoenix people in Connecticut now that we had one event that kind of got some miscommunication, but we're excited to work with you guys to have people come and experience this. I mean, I started the Multiple Pathways Hiking Club when I was getting ready for the trail, and I would like to revive that. But there's lots of things we can do, and I think it's about timing, and when it all aligns, it comes together in a beautiful way that I don't think humans necessarily can always orchestrate.
Yeah.
You have to be really in tune to something. I think we're getting pretty close.
Yeah, I think so.
I think the piece with, and I don't know how, this is just an idea, so I don't even know if it's right for this setting, but the idea is you have these volunteers that are very motivated to do things. If there was a way to train them so they could make it sustainable for themselves somehow, that they raise funds or they do whatever, or they get somebody to back the effort, not charging people fees, but really about how could they get people in their local communities to support their effort. And I think that's what we're starting to see, that more and more people are branching out, whether it's a recovery coach service or whatever, and finding ways to make it work. It's probably things that they're a lot smarter than you and I. They'll figure it out. They'll do it, right?
Yeah.
At least smarter than you. Yeah,
definitely.
Keep it straight. So I do want to talk to you about, so we've talked about multiple pathways in recovery, which sounds like you're very supportive of.
Yes.
And you're wearing a T-shirt that says sober.
Yeah.
And so when I got to the campus that I work at, I knew that CCAR had taught me that a moderation approach to recovery is part of a multiple pathway. But there's a lot of evidence that support that, particularly for youth and young adults, that sobriety is probably the safest way. But I do support my students in a moderation approach, because sooner or later, if that doesn't work for them,
Yeah,
at least the door has been open for them to look at sobriety as an option.
absolutely.
But I don't know by the branding on your T-shirt if Phoenix is really focused on abstinence-based recovery.
I think the reason that we chose 48 hours sober before attending an event is to make space for folks that are in that moderation place. It's my own story, as I mentioned earlier. I'd stay sober a couple nights so I could climb more, and then the rest of the week I was a mess and missing work because I was so hungover and whatnot. I started to, in reflection, I started to realize, like, hey, the weekend was fairly drama-free, other than maybe the blizzard or the ice storm or ice fall or whatever it is. So I think that always having that low threshold to entry, 48 hours sober, if you can piece that together, you can come into any Phoenix event. We always joke that the heaviest weight in the gym is the front door, because it's intimidating sometimes to come to your first event, but when you show up you just realize that everybody wants you there, and if you go out the next night and drink, you just wait 2 more days and you can come back, and no one's judging you. They're just there for you when you show back up again.
And it's self-monitoring. It's not like you're gonna it's not like you're gonna
drug test people on
or make somebody pass a sobriety test or something. It's and I think that's the best way. This is what we're asking, and this is your choice.
Yeah,
treat people like resources.
Yep,
and hopefully they'll respect and honor the guideline.
Absolutely, and I mean sometimes people go from coming one night a week to coming 3 times a week, and just by default they're could wear this shirt,
Yeah.
Well, and I wear the shirt more so just to make space for people to be able to make whatever choice they want.
Yeah.
Right. To put it out there myself so that other folks can choose, and we can not just do. I'm trying not to say stigma reduction anymore, just stigma elimination.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying not to say the word stigma anymore, because anytime you say stigma, you think about the stigma. So I say promoting recovery, and that's what you're doing. You're promoting recovery.
Agreed. Yeah.
And even normalizing it. One of the things that I've learned is that for a large public institution like our state college that I work at, 65% of students identify as not using drugs or alcohol, illicit drugs or alcohol. But you don't hear from that population at all. That's not the population that a lot of attention is focused on. So even wearing a shirt that says sober is helping to normalize, for whatever your reason, you can be sober.
Yeah, I love, so one of my friends, his sons are sort of in their adolescence, and they grab his Phoenix shirts and wear them to school. And it's just normal to have something that says about rise, recover, live, or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're proud of their dad, so it's like that's the stuff that just sort of normalizes it. Yeah. And when we do that, we make space for people to ask for help that are struggling.
Yeah.
Do you think our kids are proud of our recovery?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say 90% of them.
90% of our kids?
Yeah.
How many kids do we have?
Maybe
you got to
4
90%.
out of 5.
Like, what?
I don't know. I have to ask the last one, but I know of 4. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
We don't really talk about it much. They bring it up once in a while, but we've just lived a life of recovery now together for many years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Phil's youngest was just 2 months old when he got into recovery, so they haven't experienced that lifestyle at all with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Hey, did we miss anything that you would want anybody to know?
Well, yeah, we did.
We did? What we missed?
Well, I need to know a little bit about your wife and baby.
Oh,
Share
my
that
gosh.
news with us.
They're great, and my wife Kate and I met actually at jiu-jitsu. She did a drop into the jiu-jitsu academy where I was training, and I was like, okay, she's tiny and I'm not. I was like, okay, just be gentle, and we trained together for a minute, on the mat. But I just remembered her when I saw her again, which is she actually came to Phoenix, so she's in recovery. And I was like, hey, don't I know you? And she's like, I don't think so. She pretty much shut me down. But we started to spend time together and fall in love. And we each come from our own recovery stories, so we had to figure out some stuff. It's like all relationships but started to step into this journey of sharing life together and wanted to start a family, and we're worried that I'm a little bit older dad, and I was wondering if we could get this sort of family thing going, and here we go. We got a little one, Magnus, and he's awesome, and
you love that name,
growing
don't
up
you?
quick.
Magnus.
I do.
Yeah.
It's a great name. I was 45 when we had
the last
Rothschild.
one. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I know what it's like to be an older dad and a younger dad.
You both of them.
He started early and ended late.
Yeah, I did. And all in between.
Kate's been great, just supporting me through this. I give a lot of my time to the Phoenix, so she's been so gracious in that. And it's just, a big part of the Phoenix community too. So it's been a gift.
Yeah, that is something Phil wanted me to. Phil interpreted the purpose of my life was to work in the recovery community, and I disagreed for a long time, and having something in common to do together has really re-energized our marriage after really devoting ourselves to careers and children raising for so long.
Yeah.
Even just doing the podcast together has been really good for us.
It's been good for me. I got to meet you and hang out with you, so I've appreciated.
Everybody
today.
agrees, right, Don, that I'm nicer than Phil, so. Donna's playing it really safe today. I don't actually work for CCAR, so.
She is nicer than me. I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you, Scott, very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I guess the only thing I'd close with is just that, I think in the recovery space, organizations have been trying to get funding and support for a long time. We were fortunate to get some pretty big investments in Phoenix. So we're hiring a bunch if folks are looking to help us kind of grow the Phoenix movement. And like I mentioned, that folks can volunteer anywhere to start Phoenix now. So just they can learn more at thephoenix.org. thephoenix.org. Yeah.
Why'd you change your name anyway?
We realized the multi-sport side of it was sort of limiting us a little bit. We started to have art night and social events and all sorts of stuff. And I'm real excited about like our music program. And if somebody's a photographer, they could start a Phoenix event and teach other people. Like there's the possibilities are sort of limitless. So I think the sports and athletics will always be sort of at our core, but Phoenix could be anything if it's a supportive, nurturing environment and you're inspired by something, you want to share it with other people, then we'll put it on the calendar.
And work in recovery at thephoenix.org.
Exactly.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And check out his TED Talk. You can just, Google Scott Strode? Is that how you found it?
Yeah.
And
Pops
you were
right
also recognized by CNN, right?
Yeah, CNN Hero early on, which I was excited that they were sharing about recovery, not just sort of the...
Yeah, when I saw that, I was, wow, this is great that recovery was made national headlines. So congratulations and thank you for being very visible and vocal about your own recovery. Like Bill White said, a vanguard of people willing to offer themselves as living proof. And you've done that for the last 24 years, and you're making a difference. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the same for you. And I loved reading a little bit about your Appalachian Trail, so I'm excited for the world to be able to do that.
Oh, yeah, and thanks for writing the foreword. I'm working on it. I'm going to get it. We're going to get it published. We'll get it out there. Continue.
Thank you.
It's good to meet you.